Start with the latest developments in the mysterious death of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's older half-brother. The South Korean National Intelligence Service said this morning that the body is almost certainly that of Kim Jong-nam and that he was killed by a toxic substance. The NIS also said, however, the autopsy results, which are expected from Malaysia today, are needed to verify the exact method of the substance delivery. Kim Jong-nam was attacked while waiting at the budget terminal of Kuala Lumpur International Airport at around 9 a.m. local time on Monday by two women, both presumed to be North Korean agents. He died during transit to a nearby hospital. The two women are believed to be still in Malaysia, and local police have launched an investigation into the case that includes a search for the suspects. According to the NIS, Kim Jong-nam had been targeted for about 5 years by the North Korean regime, and he had been under the protection of the Chinese government. The NIS also confirmed that his wife and his son are now in protection in Beijing.
Who was Kim Jong-nam? Although he was Kim Jong-il's eldest son, he was considered the black sheep in the Kim family dynasty. Born May 10, 1971 in Pyongyang, he was the son to Kim Jong-il and his mistress Song Hae-rim. He was expected to be the first in line to be leader of North Korea, but events took a different turn. Kim Jong-nam is thought to have spent much of his childhood in Pyongyang, living like a prince. But during his teenage years, he spent time studying in Switzerland, where he reportedly learnt about democracy. He's said to have tried to convince Kim Jong-il to reform North Korea too, and that's when he started to fall out of favour with his father. In May 2001, he was caught trying to enter Japan with his son and two women using a fake passport to visit Disneyland, Tokyo. The much publicized incident is said to have deeply embarrassed his father, cementing Kim Jong-il's negative view of his eldest son. Kim Jong-nam was essentially exiled from North Korea thereon and spent much of his time in China and Macau, and eventually his half-brother Kim Jong-un was named heir apparent in 2010. Although rarely appearing in public, he would speak to reporters occasionally and make critical comments about his brother and the regime. There's currently no evidence of Kim Jong-un's involvement in his siblings' death, but suspicion is high. It's being considered a continuation of the purges that the leader has carried out since he came to power 6 years ago. He has so far reportedly executed at least 140 senior officials, including his uncle and mentor Chang Song-taek in 2013. Whether Kim Jong-nam would have posed a threat to Kim Jong-un is unclear. Although he showed no signs of ambition to challenge his younger brother, Kim Jong-nam had represented a question mark of legitimacy and remained a potential thorn in the leader's side.
Last night, the UN Security Council unanimously condemned North Korea's latest ballistic missile test. It called Sunday's launch a grave violation of international law. China signed on to that statement. The country is one of North Korea's only allies and its main lifeline. Adriana Diaz is in Beijing following China's reaction. Adriana, good morning.
Good morning. North Korea says Sunday's launch was for self-defense. It comes after months of quiet and at a particularly sensitive time for Beijing, just as relations with the Trump administration were starting to thaw. So this launch adds a new layer of uncertainty to the region that's still trying to get a read on the new and unpredictable U.S. president.
The missile tested Sunday was a new type, using solid fuel, not liquid, to eject from a mobile launcher. It's more stable and allows for less advanced warning. Analysts say the achievement is a dangerous step forward in North Korea's pursuit of a deliverable nuclear weapon. And it's a first test for President Trump.
Obviously, North Korea is a big problem, and we will deal with that very strongly.
It also potentially pits the new U.S. administration against China, North Korea's only major ally, less than a week after President Trump smoothed things over in a phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
China and the United States have fundamentally different approaches of dealing with North Korea.
Tong Zhao was with the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy.
China believes we have to gradually encourage North Korea to liberalize its economy, to open up to the international community.
90% of North Korea's trade is with China, leading Western officials to accuse Beijing of propping up the neighboring dictatorship. But China says it's doing its part by signing on to stringent UN sanctions. China has fully implemented the relevant Security Council resolutions, said spokesman Gang Shuang. China fears any further action could destabilize the already shaky regime and turn North Korea into its enemy.
Now the Western countries want China to take the consequences of provoking North Korea.
China doesn't want to get caught in the middle.
Yeah.
The U.S. and South Korea will hold their annual large-scale military operations in March. And just this morning, North Korea said those operations could seriously undermine peace and security in the region. They could also close the door to any direct engagement between North Korea and the U.S. and push North Korea to test even larger and more powerful missiles.
Well, the DPRK has rapidly expanded its nuclear and missile programs in recent years, and the country has conducted 5 nuclear tests. The first underground test was in October 2006. The following February, Pyongyang agreed to shut down its main nuclear reactor following the six-party talks disarmament process. But then it conducted more tests in 2009, 2013, and 2016. And in January 2016, the DPRK claimed it had successfully tested a hydrogen bomb. And after another test in September the same year, it claimed the test enabled them to confirm that its warhead can be mounted to a missile and to verify the warhead's power. And also in 2016, the DPRK is believed to have carried out a test of an engine for an intercontinental ballistic missile made up of a cluster of smaller rockets. It also conducted 3 ballistic missile tests launched from submarines with varying levels of success. Multiple UN resolutions since 2006 have failed to stop the DPRK's pursuit of weapons of mass destruction.
Russian officials are expressing frustration over Flynn's resignation. He was seen as an important bridge between Moscow and Washington. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg has that part of the story tonight from Milan, Italy.
It was top news today in Moscow, the resignation of U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn over phone conversations late last year with the Russian ambassador to Washington. Members of the Russian parliament, or Duma, were quick to fire off tweets and Facebook postings saying this had nothing to do with national security and protocol. One noted this was probably the fastest resignation of a national security advisor in history. There was a sense among some in the Duma that this is purely and simply a Washington witch hunt against anyone who wants to normalize ties with Russia.
This situation is aimed at creating an impression among ordinary people and in the U.S. political establishment that Russia is still a strategic opponent, to put it mildly.
The Justice Department worried if Flynn had not been straight about what was said to the Russian ambassador on the phone, he could be vulnerable to blackmail. The Kremlin, having also denied the Russian ambassador and General Flynn discussed sanctions, steered clear of passing judgment today.
We don't want to comment on this in any way. These are internal matters of the Americans. These are internal matters of President Trump's administration. This is not our concern.
Flynn's paid appearance at a party to celebrate the anniversary of one of the Russian government's international TV channels in 2015, and the fact that he was seated next to President Vladimir Putin already made some in the United States concerned about a potentially overly cozy relationship between Flynn and Moscow. Brett, the controversy over the phone calls will only add fuel to the fire of critics who say that the administration has been too ambitious, even reckless, in its eagerness and pursuit of better ties with Russia.
The president has said many times that he would prefer better relations with Russia, but now Moscow is putting that to the test, as David Martin reports from the Pentagon.
Cruise missiles are a staple of the Russian military arsenal. But one particular type, a land-based cruise missile with a range greater than 300 miles, is specifically banned by a treaty signed by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in the final years of the Cold War. Now, U.S. officials say Russia has deployed just such a missile, capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. It happened secretly in December during the Obama administration, but it is now up to President Trump to respond to a deployment which U.S. officials say is such a blatant violation that it calls into question the value of future arms control treaties with Russia. And just 4 days ago, an incident similar to last year's buzzing by Russian jets of a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Baltic Sea happened again, this time in the Black Sea. First, a Russian patrol plane made a low pass close to the USS Porter. Then, 2 Russian jet fighters, followed a short time later by a third. U.S. officials called the flybys unsafe and unprofessional. And one more sign the Cold War is back. A Russian intelligence ship bristling with antennas to intercept communications is making its way up the east coast of the United States after leaving port in Cuba.
President Trump has said he hopes to have better relations with Russia, but Scott, that hope is being rapidly overtaken by events.
The NATO Secretary General urges allies to raise military budgets ahead of the organization's defense ministers meeting in Brussels.
We don't expect all allies to meet the 2% target immediately, but we expect all allies to stop the cuts and to start to increase defense spending.
Jens Stoltenberg has emphasized that increasing military spending is the most important thing to do for the transatlantic alliance. He also highlighted the significance of fair sharing of the budget among NATO members following his phone conversations with the U.S. president. Donald Trump sharply criticized NATO for a lack of proper financial contributions during his presidential campaign. The alliance agreed in 2014 to increase its military spending by 2% in a decade. The organization has made its biggest military build-up in Poland since the end of the Cold War, raising tensions with Russia.
The Israeli Prime Minister will be meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson this morning in Washington ahead of his first meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House tomorrow. But his first set of meetings come on the heels of some sour internal affairs in the Israeli cabinet after a series of leaks from top-level meetings. The Israeli government is now considering using lie detector tests to ensure that internal debates aren't leaked, especially since some of the Prime Minister's controversial comments regarding Trump were released to the media just before his visit to Washington. Prior to Netanyahu's departure to the United States, the Israeli leader reportedly warned his ministers to tread lightly and, quote, take Trump's personality into account during their upcoming 4-hour meeting. The premier did, however, publicly characterize the upcoming talks with this brief statement.
The alliance between Israel and America has always been extremely strong. It's about to get even stronger. President Trump and I see eye to eye on the dangers emanating from the region, but also on the opportunities. And we'll talk about both, as well as upgrading the relations between Israel and the United States in many, many fields.
Hours earlier, Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan declared that all members of the Security Cabinet, and foremost the Prime Minister, oppose a Palestinian state. But the premier sidestepped a question from reporters on the current status of his commitment to a two-state solution. Meanwhile, photos have already been released of the Israeli premier meeting with several of his top advisors at the official Blair House presidential guest residence. There's been wide speculation that the premier hopes to convince President Trump to lift restrictions on convicted espionage agent Jonathan Pollard, so that he can finally move to Israel. After serving 30 years in prison, the former U.S. Naval Intelligence officer was released in November of 2015, but is forbidden to leave New York for 5 years. Before leaving the American capital, Netanyahu is also slated to hold talks with Vice President Mike Pence and both Republican and Democratic congressional leaders. But of course, the high point is tomorrow's meeting with the new U.S. president.
Well, the Pentagon has confirmed to RT that despite vowing not to use depleted uranium in Syria, they have in fact fired thousands of rounds during the US-led anti-ISIL operation. This is an official video showing coalition strikes using depleted uranium to target an Islamic State of truck convoy. The incident happened in November in 2015 as part of an operation known as Inherent Resolve, aimed at crippling infrastructure used by ISIL to fund itself through oil production. Let's take a closer look at what exactly depleted uranium is and why it's so dangerous. It's known as DU. It's a toxic and radioactive compound used in armor-piercing munitions. Many scientists have voiced concerns that it puts civilians at risk and that exposure can damage people's health for generations after its use. Gaina Chichikan has more details.
U.S. Central Command wrote us that the military had used depleted uranium to destroy over 330 trucks, which ISIL was using to transport its illicit oil. These airstrikes took place in November of 2015 in Syria. CENTCOM said that the U.S. military had fired over 5,200 rounds containing depleted uranium and high explosive incendiary materials during these operations. Depleted uranium is known to be very effective at destroying armored vehicles, including tanks, but its use has been extremely controversial, as it is believed that people's exposure to the material can cause cancer and birth defects. The U.S. military's use of this toxic material contradicts what U.S. officials had said earlier, which was that they would not use depleted uranium. In March of 2015, coalition spokesman John Moore was quoted as saying, U.S. and coalition aircraft have not been and will not be using depleted uranium munitions in Iraq or Syria during Operation Inherent Resolve. It is unclear how many Syrians were or will be exposed to the toxic material, but its use in densely populated areas during the American invasion of Iraq had a major blowback. It was partly because of the blowback from Iraq that officials gave assurances that the military would not use the material again. But it turns out years later, they did.
Two extremist groups battle in the war-torn Idlib province of Syria. Nearly 6 years into a civil war and 3 years after the rise of ISIS, Syrian territory is controlled by a patchwork of forces. Two of the military forces in the northwestern province of Idlib include the Levant Liberation Committee and the Jund al-Aqsa Group. The Levant Liberation Committee takes orders from al-Qaeda, and the Jund al-Aqsa fighters align much more closely with ISIS. Though both ISIS and al-Qaeda are organizations of religious extremists and both oppose Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, the two differ and followers sometimes clash violently. Both the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and an official from a separate rebel group reported the violence on February 13th. According to the observatory, 2 days of fighting had killed a total of 69 militants. During the clashes, the al-Qaeda affiliate seized 6 villages from the Jund al-Aqsa.
On Tuesday, General Raymond Tony Thomas, commander of U.S. Special Operations, said that the U.S. and its allies have killed over 60,000 ISIS fighters. In recent weeks, airstrikes against Raqqa, Syria, the group's self-declared capital, have increased, while the assault on Mosul has continued. The thousands of ISIS fighters that have been killed in Mosul could count toward the new higher body count estimate. However, Christopher Sherwood, a Department of Defense spokesperson, has stressed references to enemy killed are estimates, not precise figures. While the number of enemy killed is one measure of military success, the coalition does not use this as a measure of effectiveness in the campaign to defeat ISIS. Many American officials have also said that the Pentagon does not officially tally body counts, as it has been found not to be particularly useful.
These zoos were once tourist destinations, but now the animals there are barely surviving. The zoos are stuck in conflict zones. As people flee the violence, animals are often left behind, trapped in their enclosures. That means little to no food, water, or medicine. Only 1 lion and 1 bear survived at a zoo in Mosul, Iraq after recent violence. As Yemen nears a famine, nearly 300 animals in one zoo died from starvation. In Gaza, researchers found only 15 animals alive at a zoo after bombings. The once bustling amusement park was previously home to hundreds of animals. Relocating the animals can get political and require negotiations with other countries. Animal rights groups have tried to care for abandoned animals, but often can't get to zoos until the conflict subsides.
Police in the Democratic Republic of Congo have made a pre-dawn raid on a separatist group in the capital Kinshasa. They killed at least 4 people but failed to arrest the group's leader, a self-styled religious prophet. Dozens of people stormed the home of Nemuanda Nsemi, a member of parliament and leader of Bundu Dia Congo. The group wants the country to return to a pre-colonial kingdom that ruled for centuries, and Semi's calling on his supporters to oust President Joseph Kabila, who refuses to step down after his term in office expired in December.
We still do not know the exact cause of the situation that took place here, only that we, the residents of this neighborhood, are not safe because last night Mwanda Nsemi's militants entered our land and were throwing rocks. I don't know if they were confronting us because of the police.
Experts in the Philippines warn citizens to remain cautious in the aftermath of a powerful earthquake. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology released the warning Monday, February 13th, 3 days after a deadly 6.7 magnitude quake struck Surigao. Institute Director Renato Solidum said the residents in Metro Manila and surrounding provinces lying on the West Valley Fault should be especially cautious. The West Valley Fault, spanning 100 kilometers through Metro Manila, Laguna, and Cavite, is expected to generate a magnitude 7.2 earthquake. The fault moves about every 400 years. The last earthquake it triggered happened 357 years ago. Based on a 2004 study, the forecasted earthquake, dubbed the Big One, could kill up to 34,000 people. Experts urge state officials to revisit the structural integrity of public infrastructure, including the International Airport in Pasay City, South Harbor Point in Manila, and many others that are reportedly vulnerable.
Artist Catalina Alexis says she lives in fear that the 3-story building she shares with several families will collapse anytime. Haiti's 2010 earthquake caused a lot of damage, including cracks to its structure.
They told us it's dangerous to live here, but we have nowhere else to go. We work here and we know the danger, but can't afford another place.
A partly collapsed ceiling tops the building. Catalin's husband, Patrick, says there's nothing they can do.
We know living here is a huge risk. As you can see, our situation is very hard. We're in the hands of God.
Throughout Port-au-Prince, authorities say more than 6,000 people are living and working in dangerous conditions, including some who live on the rubble, and they don't want to leave. Authorities say municipalities have to implement a national reconstruction plan, but they need a lot of resources.
In some cases, people did not let us demolish their homes. Legally, we cannot just do it on our own. That's why today you have so many people living in houses that are severely damaged.
The government has implemented an awareness campaign throughout the country to help Haitians be better prepared. But authorities say they need families to commit to finding safer areas to rebuild.
But the challenges for the government are immense as people continue to live and build on hilltops that are vulnerable. And authorities say they're not following construction codes designed to withstand future earthquakes.
Farmer Alice Kanyera and his neighbors grow maize in Zimbabwe. The small-scale farmers say they've never seen worms that look like this before. They've been told they're called army worms, caterpillars that are said to march like an army in their search for food. They are ravaging staple crops across southern Africa. Pesticides don't appear to trouble them.
We are looking for labor to search for them because chemical they are failing to kill parasites. So now we are using people to search one by one and destroy it. That's the method we are using.
Are you scared it's going to get worse?
Yeah, it is going to get worse. Because we don't know where these worms are coming from.
UN experts believe the armyworm infestation began in neighboring Zambia before moving here to Zimbabwe and other countries. An emergency meeting is being held in Harare to plan how to get rid of them.
What we expect is that we will know the scale of the problem in the different countries and how much it will cost to control the armyworm. We also expect that the countries will have a coordinated approach on how they can control this worm now and in the future.
Zimbabwe's Agriculture Department says armyworms have been found in most provinces of the country. Many people in Zimbabwe eat maize. It's a staple food here, but farmers worry their crops will be destroyed, and that could mean food shortages. The armyworms also devour wheat, millet and rice, important crops in southern Africa. The 3-day meeting in Harare is roughly 100 kilometers away from Alois. He says if he doesn't get help soon, his family will be in financial trouble. He and many other farmers here urgently need someone to tell them how to kill these invading pests for good.
Emergency services in Louisville, Kentucky received 52 overdose calls in a 32-hour period last week. The calls came in between Wednesday, February 8th and Friday the 10th. Louisville Metro Emergency Services says most of them involved heroin, although some dealt with alcohol and prescription drugs, and one person died. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says heroin overdoses nationwide increased 23% from 2014 to 2015. City authorities are investigating if fentanyl-laced heroin caused the overdoses. Fentanyl is an extremely strong pain reliever, sometimes cut with heroin. It has contributed to hundreds of deaths over the past few years. Overdoses are spiking in other regions near Louisville as well. 2.5 hours away in Montgomery County, Ohio, more than 145 people died of opioid overdoses in January alone.
In Northern California tonight, the evacuation order has been lifted for nearly 200,000 people who live below the Oroville Dam. A damaged spillway is no longer in danger of collapse, but more rain is on the way and the homecoming could be brief. John Blackstone is there.
Scott, the huge release of water from the Oroville Dam has helped make the dam safe enough that residents are now being allowed to return. But even as the evacuation order was lifted, urgent work continued on the damaged spillway, racing as quickly as heavy equipment could race, pouring boulders into gaping holes to prevent a catastrophe. Officials are confident those aggressive efforts will prevent a failure at the dam. But just 48 hours ago, disaster appeared imminent. With so much water pouring over the emergency spillway, it was eroding the hillside. The first test of these fixes could come as early as tomorrow, when the beginning of a series of storms hits this area.